You're listening to Real Conversations, where every week we take a peek at the favorite movies of fascinating people. Real Conversations is hosted by Brian Coley, the founder of Art Within and Real. Today on the show, Brian sits down with the brothers, Bryant and Scotland Wright. Bryant is the senior pastor at Johnson Ferry Baptist Church in Marietta, Georgia, and founded Right from the Heart Ministries. Scotland has been in the commercial real estate business for over 30 years and owns his own firm, Scotland Wright Associates, in Atlanta.
All right, we're in the Real Studios today talking to Bryant Wright. Bryant, thank you so much for being with me today.
Glad to be with you.
All right, so we usually dive straight into this. So I want you to tell the folks what's on your top 10.
Would you like for me to tell the whole list?
Definitely.
Okay. The Sound of Music, Patton, Driving Miss Daisy, Gladiator, A Beautiful Mind, Les Mis, Schindler's List, A Man for All Seasons, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Forrest Gump.
Nice. I see a lot of military guys in your top 10. That's the first thing that sticks out to me. You got Patton, you got Gladiator. We're dealing with Nazis again in Schindler's List a little bit. Of course, it's the French Revolution and Les Mis. Anything around that, as far as maybe just a sense of courage or anything that draws you to military?
Well, I think one is history. I think you'd also see kind of a historical theme with those. There's certain characters like Patton, such an incredibly strong leader, and yet I'm fascinated with the guy because he's so many things I'm not. In the sense that I'm just not able to cuss like he could cuss, be as brutal on people as he was.
Yeah.
It was just a fascinating character to me, and yet drawn to the fact that he accomplished so much. He was his own worst enemy in the sense that he really would bring all kind of unnecessary problems on himself with his egotistical, driven personality. But to hear a character in a movie say that God had called him or he was born to kill Germans, I mean, just even the thought that you're born to kill a whole group of people was that's just a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
And plus have a lot of interest in World War II history and just watching all of that.
I can tell you do like history, and you do have a pretty swath of history here on your top 10 for sure.
Well, I have a funny story on A Man for All Seasons. I thought at one point it was the greatest movie I'd ever seen. So when I was a singles minister in Second Baptist Houston, it was overwhelmingly young singles, a lot like you see in the Buckhead Church in the sense of the location in Houston, Texas. It was just a prime spot around the Galleria area where young singles gathered, kind of like Buckhead here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And so we would on Friday night have some big celebration thing that would maybe be a movie or just fun gathering. And so I told them we were going to see what was the greatest movie of all time. And we packed out this gathering of single adults. It was A Man for All Seasons. And honestly, halfway through the movie, they had either left or were soundly sleeping, snoring. No. I mean, it was just they were absolutely bored to death. And I had a hard time selling them on my next recommendation of a movie after that. But I was so inspired in that movie by a man who had such strong convictions of his faith, Sir Thomas More, that he was willing to die for those convictions. And also the brilliance of the man as a lawyer, that he was able to work within the law and the system to stay alive an incredibly long time with every possible legal way he could do it. But in the end, he couldn't compromise on the core convictions of his faith in Christ. And so it inspired me greatly to see that. And really, Gregory Peck, even though it's not so much Harper Lee, doesn't hit the Christian perspective, but what he does, all of us who grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s, you couldn't help but have a sense of inferiority complex, a sense of defensiveness, because the rest of the country looking down on the South with the segregation, and understandably, by the way, looking down on the South. But at the time, I think Southerners felt defensive. And so whenever you had a noble character who was purely Southern and yet standing up to the injustices, that was extremely inspiring. And I think when he finishes and loses, but he walks out of the courtroom and it's still hard for me not to get emotional now.
Yeah.
Thinking about all the African Americans in the balcony standing.
Up,
When I'm saying to his daughter, you need to stand, your dad's walking. Boy, that was just a powerful scene.
It seems like the South is really important to you geographically.
I think Driving Miss Daisy part of that is a love for Atlanta in the spring.
Yeah.
It's an amazingly beautiful city, and the Druid Hills area in the spring is just gorgeous. But here was also a relationship with a black man. He was her chauffeur and assisted her, and she was quite a character. But there was a lot of Atlanta history immersed in just the story there, and the racial tensions, and yet the unique relationship. And my goodness, Morgan Freeman just...
I know. That was his best role there.
I think part of that, too, was in our childhood.
Yeah.
We saw so many black men like that maintained their dignity, even amidst an incredibly oppressive, segregated society. But you think about it. I mean, the reason he captured that character and so inspires me is he maintained his dignity amidst all the indignities that a grown man had to go through.
And that's it.
It's really an inspiring story to me to see, and yet hilarious story with.
Well, and you just connected the dot for me, because I was looking at that film going, well, is that the outlier? But it doesn't seem to be, based on the way you just described it. So you really respond to these characters who kind of maintain their dignity. Would that be fair to say?
I think that's I think that's definitely true, and even Forrest Gump.
How would you view that?
Because to me, he did. There's a lot that maintained his dignity, and she was sorry as hang.
She's the prodigal daughter.
She was. She was eat up with sorriness. And yet he kept loving her. He kept loving her. And there's a lot of that in these movies, just the inspiration of people who are trying to do good, trying to do the right thing. And that's, I guess, the identification of, could I have the kind of courage that these characters do? I know what a weak person I can be inside. So I'm inspired by them, but could you really do that?
Yeah.
And I think movies can bring out a noble desire when you see courageous characters like that.
Yeah, and I have to believe that there's something in you, and I'm sure if we asked a lot of people around here, they probably would say that a lot of this idea of conviction, principled, the idea of maintaining your dignity, all these things I'm sure people might describe of you, even though you might be humble enough to look at these characters and go, well, I'm no gladiator, or I'm no,
Certainly not. I with Patton and a gladiator, that would be a long shot. It'd be hard to identify, but I am inspired by their leadership and their courage.
Yeah.
And standing up for what they felt was right in that situation.
Well, let's go the opposite. Who do you feel is what do you feel like is the biggest threat? Who would be the biggest antagonist in your top 10?
You mean like the Nazis in Schindler's List, or is that what you're asking?
Or it could be, just the idea of, let's say, with A Beautiful Mind, that antagonism being just having to deal with knowing that your mind is not doing exactly what you want it to do. Well,
I think that's a good question, Brian, because I haven't had to deal with something as extreme as schizophrenia.
Yeah.
But I did have two different times in my life of dealing with prolonged depression, one my sophomore year of college and one in my last year and a half of seminary. And when you're going through a time like that, it is all-consuming. When you know things are not right and you very much want them to be normal again and right, and they're not. And so I really identified from that perspective. I couldn't possibly understand the schizophrenia. That's just something I'm not familiar with, other than this movie helping me to have a little better understanding of that. But when you go through prolonged depression, one of the lies of depression is that you feel like it's going to always be this way.
Yeah.
That's what's so bad about depression. You just literally don't see like there's anything you could do to change that. And so the sense of desperation there. I think also God used depression in my life to break me, because I think I was a far too self-confident young man. And if I'm going to be a pastor, the last thing you need in your pastor is somebody who is far too self-confident. No pastor's really going to be able to connect unless a pastor's gone through brokenness. Now, mine occurred that way, and there was a lot of spiritual dimension that way. A lot of spiritual dimension that, because I was so confused spiritually why I was going through such a down time, especially when you're called to ministry and you hate where you are at seminary. And a lot of that was not just me. I mean, it was a terrible experience for so many because of where they had gone theologically. It was just so depressing.
I see, yeah.
When you're in a seminary that belittles the sacred things of your faith in class every single day.
Wow.
From the resurrection to the miracles to anything like that. And so, that was really, really tough. It was miserable. But it's still the brokenness God uses to force us into dependence on God, total dependence. And I was far too self-confident as a young man. That had been a bad news as a pastor on that.
Yeah.
So when you move from self-confidence to God confidence out of necessity, because you just have to, that's the place to be in if you're going to be a pastor.
Yeah.
And so I think God has used that as He takes our weakness and turns it into God's strength.
Yeah.
In those kind of times.
That's great. That's really good. And you could see how that movie in your top 10, A Beautiful Mind, is such a good contrast against these really self-confident characters.
That's right. Like a Patton or whatever.
Yeah. So you have these really confident characters, like we don't think of Gregory Peck, but anything but stalwart, and same way with Patton and Gladiator and ultimately, Sir Thomas More and everything, and even Forrest Gump. He's pretty stalwart in his pursuit. But it's wonderful that God gave you a beautiful mind as just a reminder of brokenness in a way, as well as, who these people are fighting for. They're all broken too. The Jean Valjeans are those broken that oppress people that are being.
That story to me, just thinking about a kid going off to war, you think about a prostitute that just trapped in a lifestyle, and this guy giving her a second chance, and the hope for a better world, and just there's so many things in Les Mis that just touch every big issue of life that tugs at your heart and all. So that's just an incredibly inspiring story.
It's good. So I brought in Scotland Wright, who is Bryant's brother, and I thought we'd do a little looking at both of your top 10 lists and compare, see what's all in the family and what needs to be exercised out of the family or something like that. I don't know. So Scotland, tell everybody what's on your top 10.
My top 10, Brian, is To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, we share one, huh?
Yes,
That's
right
good.
off the bat.
There we go.
Waiting for Guffman.
Yep.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Ah, that's good.
Forrest Gump.
Another shared one, yeah.
Le Mans, as the Americans would say, racing movie.
Yep.
Lawrence of Arabia. 12 Angry Men.
All right.
Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah.
Napoleon Dynamite, and Jeremiah Johnson.
I just love the contrast between Jeremiah Johnson and Napoleon Dynamite. Let me just say that. So let's do this. You tell me why To Kill a Mockingbird, because I think that's a great place to start, or Forrest Gump, either one. What would you say is the reason you have that one on your list? Yeah.
I think about it a lot, and it's also one of my top 5 books by Harper Lee that I try to read frequently. But the Southern culture aspect of it is really important, but also the aspect of looking out for the underdog, looking out for the downtrodden, for the person who doesn't really have a chance in life, and taking the risk and the challenge to defend somebody like that.
Yeah.
And to stand up for someone like that, even knowing that the ultimate result is probably not going to be a good ending for that person, but nevertheless taking the chance and the risk to do so.
Well, that's really important. I think a lot of your characters take a lot of risk, I would say. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Good.
Sure.
Yeah, they do.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Politics has always intrigued me, and just having somebody that was willing to, take the challenge or accept the opportunity to run for office and then be elected, even when he probably thought he wasn't going to be.
Yeah.
Reminds me a lot of Abraham Lincoln, quite frankly. From the standpoint of really looking out for the people and wanting to do what's best for the country and those that he represents, and going to the ultimate extreme to do so.
Well, it seems like you and your brother here share a love for the legal system. Is what I see.
Right.
You were talking about how, Bryant, that you were being pressured to be a lawyer. Well, I'm seeing a little bit of legal going on here.
I don't know what it says.
Did
when
y'all
you got
have
Cool
oppressive
Hand Luke,
parents who said, you both have got to be lawyers, and you went the other way? Is that what happened?
Maybe it's because we were all, in a family of 4 siblings. I'm the third child, so I'm stuck in the middle. So I'm kind of politicking and negotiating my whole life, trying trying to figure out which side am I on.
Nice.
Older siblings, younger siblings, where do I stand? So
Nice.
I would love to be Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
yeah,
that would be so fun.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And what we're seeing